In a landmark judgment that has sent political shockwaves through Westminster, the Supreme Court has delivered a damning blow to Sir Keir Starmer's foreign policy agenda. The court ruled against what it described as covert attempts by the Labour government to realign the United Kingdom with European Union regulations, moves that had neither been debated in Parliament, disclosed to the public, nor granted democratic legitimacy. What the Starmer administration had framed as pragmatic European cooperation has now been exposed in legal terms as a troubling and unilateral maneuver to reshape Britain's post-Brexit future behind closed doors. The verdict marks more than just a legal defeat. It is a profound political humiliation for the Labour leader who built his leadership credentials on promises of transparency, accountability, and fidelity to the Brexit mandate. At the heart of the Supreme Court's judgment was a clear and damning conclusion. Starmer's government acted unlawfully by attempting to bypass Parliament and introduce sweeping regulatory changes via executive authority. The justices determined that such actions violated fundamental principles of Britain's constitutional democracy. They condemned the legal rationale behind the strategy as deeply flawed and accused the executive of gross overreach. Sources close to the court proceedings revealed that justices were particularly disturbed by the secrecy and rapidity with which these changes were pursued. Some of the measures in question had already been discreetly embedded into provisional agreements with the EU, while others were being introduced in trade talks, all without public consultation or parliamentary scrutiny. In the eyes of the court, this was not merely poor governance. It was a calculated attempt to subvert democratic processes. The political fallout was swift and severe. Opposition figures immediately capitalized on the ruling. Nigel Farage hailed the judgment as a victory for democracy, accusing Starmer of orchestrating a clandestine campaign to rejoin the European project. Reform UK issued a scathing statement, accusing the Labour leader of betraying British sovereignty. Even the crisis-hit Conservative Party seized on the opportunity to attack. Senior Tories described the verdict as further proof that Labour cannot be trusted to govern. One Conservative MP summarised the sentiment in no uncertain terms: Starmer is a lawyer who thought he was above the law. Did you know that over 95% of our viewers aren't subscribed to the channel? We totally get it, life gets busy, and sometimes it's easy to forget. But here's the thing, subscribing is completely free, and it really helps us keep creating the content you enjoy. So, why not hit that subscribe button and join our community? It only takes a second, but it makes a world of difference to us. Thank you for your support. Perhaps more damaging still were the reactions from within Starmer's own party. Reports suggest widespread disquiet among senior advisers and backbench MPs, with tensions erupting behind closed doors. Furious discussions have reportedly broken out over who authorized the EU realignment strategy and why it was pursued without broader consultation within the party. Several Labour MPs, particularly those representing constituencies that voted Leave, are said to be livid. Many now believe they were deliberately kept in the dark about policies that could potentially jeopardize their electoral prospects. Some are demanding an emergency meeting of the shadow cabinet. Others are calling for a public apology and a full internal inquiry. As one Labour MP, speaking anonymously, told journalists, this is not merely a legal setback, it's a political unravelling. Constitutional experts are already describing the court's decision as one of the most consequential in recent memory. Not only does it reaffirm Parliament's primary role in shaping foreign policy, but it also establishes a precedent that no future government, Labour or otherwise, can move Britain closer to any international alliance without full democratic scrutiny. In short, Starmer has not only lost a critical policy battle, he may have helped redefine the limits of his own office. While Downing Street issued a carefully worded statement promising to review the judgment, chaos reportedly reigns within Labour headquarters. The policy at the heart of the ruling was not a mere administrative oversight, it was the cornerstone of Starmer's long-held ambition to quietly reintegrate Britain into the EU's legal and regulatory orbit without triggering public backlash. According to leaked communications, even members of the shadow cabinet were kept in the dark. They were handed vague talking points about economic pragmatism and restoring partnerships, while the true nature of the strategy remained hidden. Behind the scenes, however, Starmer's team had reportedly been engaged in secret discussions with EU trade representatives, seeking ways to harmonise UK standards with EU regulations and integrate Britain into shared regulatory agencies under the radar. One whistleblower described the entire operation as a stealth reintegration. Within Starmer's office, the preferred terminology was reportedly regulatory convergence through administrative cooperation, a deliberately opaque phrase aimed at avoiding legal challenge and public scrutiny. That ambiguity may have shielded the plan from exposure, until now. Labour MPs in traditional heartland constituencies, many of whom campaigned on pledges to honour the Brexit vote, are now furious. As fallout from the Supreme Court's explosive ruling continues to spread, dissent within the Labour Party has erupted into full-scale rebellion. One Northern MP, speaking on condition of anonymity, told reporters, "He's lied to us. He's lied to the country. He's using our support to push an agenda we never signed up for." Another MP, reportedly close to Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, accused the party leadership of being drunk on technocracy and completely disconnected from the cultural pulse of this nation. With internal trust rapidly disintegrating and divisions deepening by the hour, Labour's leadership is now facing what many describe as a full-blown existential crisis. What began as a calculated gamble on regulatory realignment has spiraled into a legal defeat, political chaos, and potentially irreparable damage to Sir Keir Starmer's reputation. The question now is not whether Starmer will face consequences, but whether his leadership can survive them at all. The fear gripping Labour backbenchers goes far beyond legal ramifications. It's about public trust, and the devastating blow that trust has suffered. The Supreme Court's unequivocal ruling is not being dismissed as a procedural misstep or bureaucratic mishandling. It is being interpreted by voters as confirmation of a long-held suspicion that Sir Keir Starmer has been attempting to reverse Brexit by stealth, without ever seeking the electorate's permission. And if there is one transgression that British voters are unlikely to forgive, it is the feeling of being deceived. Within Labour headquarters, panic set in almost immediately. A coordinated effort at damage control was launched. Emergency calls were made to the party's communications team with orders to frame the ruling as a mere clarification, nothing more than a technical misunderstanding. But that narrative collapsed within hours. Legal experts from across the political spectrum swiftly dismantled the claim, pointing to the stark language of the court's judgment. Far from identifying a procedural error, the ruling explicitly condemned the strategy as an abuse of executive power and a breach of constitutional norms. Behind the scenes, attempts were made to shift the blame onto civil servants. Aides claimed that discussions with EU officials had been exploratory and amounted to little more than routine diplomatic engagement. However, this line of defense crumbled in the face of a series of leaked classified memos, now circulating among outraged MPs, which clearly show that Starmer personally signed off on early drafts of the EU regulatory alignment plan. The political optics are catastrophic. Here is a leader who pledged to clean up British politics and restore public trust, now caught attempting to push through a fundamental constitutional change via the back door. Worse still, these clandestine maneuvers were undertaken while Starmer publicly presented himself as a staunch defender of Brexit. He delivered speeches extolling sovereignty and the national interest, even as his government quietly sought to reintegrate Britain into the EU's regulatory orbit. This duplicity has detonated a rebellion within Labour's own ranks. Senior figures on the party's National Executive Committee are now calling for a full and independent investigation into the origins of the EU alignment strategy. Some are demanding resignations. Others are contemplating what was, until now, unthinkable, that Keir Starmer may have to step down to salvage what remains of the party's credibility. The crisis is deepening and widening. In Scotland, Labour leader Anna Sarwar is reported to have demanded urgent clarification on what devolved administrations were told, and when. In Wales, senior Labour figures have expressed private fury, claiming they were completely blindsided by policy decisions that could have significant economic repercussions for their regions. Even in London, where support for Starmer has been historically robust, there are signs of unease. Mayor Sadiq Khan, one of Starmer's most consistent allies, has remained conspicuously silent in recent days. His lack of public support has been interpreted by some as a sign of growing discomfort with the direction of the leadership. As party discipline crumbles and trust continues to erode, Labour finds itself at a crossroads. The Supreme Court ruling has not only halted Starmer's covert EU strategy, it has exposed a deep structural rift within the party. A rift between a leadership driven by technocratic ambition and a grassroots base still deeply connected to the democratic promises of the Brexit vote. Whether Starmer can weather this storm, or whether his leadership becomes the ultimate casualty of a failed attempt to redraw Britain's future in secret, remains to be seen. But one thing is now painfully clear: the era of quiet manoeuvring is over. The battle for Labour's soul, and its future direction, has begun in earnest. The crisis engulfing the Labour Party has now erupted into a full-blown political inferno, threatening to consume Sir Keir Starmer's leadership and derail his premiership ambitions just as the party stood on the cusp of power. Sources close to City Hall say London Mayor Sadiq Khan is livid that policies with significant implications for the capital's trade relationship with Europe were devised in total secrecy. In a single stroke, the Supreme Court's landmark ruling did more than undermine Starmer's authority. It shattered the carefully curated illusion that his leadership was stable, transparent, and principled. What began as quiet disquiet within Labour ranks has now transformed into a coordinated and deeply personal backlash. Senior Labour MPs, veteran party strategists, and long-serving loyalists are no longer whispering their concerns behind closed doors. They are openly questioning whether Starmer is fit to lead. This is no longer a matter of a singular policy error. It is being described as a full-scale mutiny, an uprising against a leader whom many now believe has betrayed both his party and the country. The first tremors of rebellion surfaced in a series of anonymous briefings to the press. One senior MP has confirmed that formal letters of no confidence have already been submitted to internal party authorities. While Labour's rules do not permit the kind of overt leadership challenges seen in the Conservative Party, insiders suggest the sheer magnitude of discontent has compelled the National Executive Committee, NEC, to convene a series of emergency meetings. Crucially, this is not a fringe revolt. The opposition to Starmer now includes core party members, centrist stalwarts, Red Wall representatives, veteran trade unionists, and rising parliamentary stars. These are not ideological agitators. They are loyalists who now feel deeply betrayed. As one disillusioned MP wrote in a leaked WhatsApp message, he didn't just light the match. He poured the petrol and told us to stand still while the fire spread. Internal party chat groups offer a bleak snapshot of the current mood. One senior aide reportedly described the atmosphere as worse than anything we endured under Corbyn. Another strategist put it even more starkly: this isn't a blip. It's a collapse. A growing number within the party blame Starmer's inner circle, particularly his legal and EU policy advisors, for pushing a strategy that was entirely disconnected from the post-Brexit political reality. The backlash has only intensified with polling data in the wake of the ruling. Labour support has dropped sharply, especially in Leave voting constituencies across the Midlands and the North. Focus groups in key battleground regions such as Yorkshire and the West Midlands have delivered brutal assessments. Starmer is now being widely perceived as evasive, elitist, and out of touch with ordinary voters. Worse still, unflattering comparisons to failed Labour leaders of the past are beginning to surface with increasing frequency. For a party that had only recently begun to believe electoral victory was within reach, the psychological damage is profound. Campaigners who were once energized and enthusiastic now fear their leader has torpedoed the campaign before it has even officially begun. Meanwhile, the leaks continue unabated. A bombshell internal document, shared with select journalists by a senior Labour source, appears to confirm that Starmer's EU alignment strategy had been in development for at least 9 months. The document outlines a phased roadmap designed to gradually synchronize British regulations with EU standards, without triggering the legal implications of formal re-accession. This was no innocent diplomatic engagement. It amounted to a stealth reintegration plan, and many Labour MPs are outraged. Some are calling it a betrayal of the Brexit mandate. Others are demanding to know why the Parliamentary Labour Party was kept in the dark about such consequential policy manoeuvres. Across the country, constituency Labour parties, CLPs, are now passing emergency motions condemning the party's leadership. Some have even suspended local campaign operations until they receive a full explanation from Starmer's office. What was once Sir Keir Starmer's covert blueprint to quietly restore Britain's ties with Brussels now threatens to destroy his leadership and rupture the Labour Party just as it stood on the threshold of government. With his credibility in tatters, trust eroded, and rebellion simmering from all corners of the party, the question facing Labour is no longer whether it can win power, but whether it can survive the collapse of the leadership project upon which so many had placed their hopes. A wave of rebellion has swept through Labour's grassroots, adding to the growing storm engulfing Sir Keir Starmer. One constituency Labour Party, CLP, chair in the North East summed up the prevailing anger in a now viral post: "We will not knock on doors to defend lies." While Momentum, the influential left-wing faction once dominant under Jeremy Corbyn, has remained publicly quiet, insiders suggest the group is preparing to exploit the chaos. Senior figures within the movement are reportedly laying the groundwork to force a leadership contest should the backlash continue to escalate. Even Labour-affiliated trade unions, typically cautious in their public statements about the party leadership, have begun issuing pointed comments about the need for democratic transparency in foreign policy. The message is clear: patience is wearing thin. Behind closed doors, murmurs of succession are beginning to grow louder. Although no formal leadership challenge has been launched, names are already in circulation. Angela Rayner, who has maintained an outward show of loyalty, is said to be furious after being excluded from the EU alignment discussions. Lisa Nandy is reportedly sounding out soft left MPs, while Wes Streeting has been holding private meetings with prominent donors and campaign strategists, fueling speculation that he is positioning himself as a viable successor. The media has wasted no time in drafting early profiles of would-be successors. Political commentators have warned that a leadership battle this close to a general election would be disastrous, yet many within Labour now believe a reckoning is inevitable. Every day Starmer remains silent. Every hour he avoids the press. The perception of weakness deepens. What once passed for strategic restraint now reads as paralysis fueled by fear. Calls are growing, even within the shadow cabinet, for an emergency press conference, full disclosure of the EU negotiations, and a public apology. Yet Starmer's inner circle reportedly remains bunkered down, insisting that the fundamentals haven't changed. The irony is that everything has. The Supreme Court's damning ruling didn't just derail a policy, it cracked the very foundations of Starmer's authority. Now, the Conservative Party and Reform UK are moving in for the kill. Within hours of the judgment, Conservative HQ unleashed a brutal digital campaign, flooding marginal seats with attack ads portraying Starmer as the Remain Prime Minister you never voted for. Slogans like "He lied," "He planned," "He lost," have begun appearing across constituencies Labour must win in the Midlands, Wales, and the North. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has seized the moment with his trademark theatrical flair. At a packed rally in Sunderland, he bellowed, "I warned you. I said Starmer would betray Brexit, and now we have the proof." The crowd erupted. Within 48 hours, Reform UK saw a surge in membership, dominated social media engagement, and even began to outpoll Labour among Leave voters in the North East. Farage's message is devastatingly simple: if they lied once, they'll lie again. The right-wing press has gone into overdrive. The Daily Mail, Telegraph, and Express have plastered their front pages with leaked memos, explosive timelines, and dramatic headlines such as, "Starmer's secret EU plot exposed." Even the more moderate Times has branded this an existential crisis for Labour. And with each passing day that Starmer refuses to face the media, the headlines grow more unforgiving. Where is Starmer? Labour in freefall. International media have also taken notice. From Le Monde to Der Spiegel, European outlets are reporting that Britain's opposition leader had been quietly preparing for regulatory alignment with Brussels. Diplomatic sources within the EU are now leaking details of back-channel meetings, draft agreements, and phased reintegration strategies, confirming suspicions that Starmer wasn't merely engaging in informal diplomacy but orchestrating a stealth re-entry into the European orbit. The official Labour line, that these talks were exploratory, has completely collapsed under scrutiny. Shadow ministers are visibly rattled. Some deny the documents even exist. Others admit the plans were discussed but never finalized. Labour's communications team, paralysed by indecision, remains torn between doubling down, issuing a climb down, or pivoting entirely. Even previously loyal MPs now concede in private that no spin operation can rescue the situation. The damage is already reaching local levels. Campaign offices across the country are being flooded with irate emails, angry phone calls, and doorstep fury. In once reliable Labour strongholds like Hartlepool and Stoke, local candidates are pleading with headquarters for guidance, yet none is forthcoming. Elsewhere, political rivals are seizing the opportunity. In Scotland, the SNP is citing the scandal as yet another reason why Westminster cannot be trusted. In Wales, Plaid Cymru is demanding a formal inquiry into Labour's undisclosed EU-related communications. For Keir Starmer, the political fallout is existential. Once heralded as steady, strategic, and competent, he is now widely viewed as secretive, legally reckless, and dangerously out of step with the public mood. His allies are faltering. His opponents are circling. The question is no longer if Starmer can survive. It is whether he can even limp to the next general election. Labour's rise was always fragile. Its collapse is now unfolding before the nation's eyes, in real time.